We hope to have another great session today. To take us through, we have three illustrious speakers, one entrepreneur, one psychometric and HR expert, and another a lawyer specializing in employment and HR services. To take us through this session, we will first call on Helen. And before that, let me have a word about our sponsor today, Gowlings. Gowlings is internationally recognized full-service law firm with offices throughout Canada, London, Beijing, and Moscow. Gowlings has been a huge supporter of entrepreneurs through TIE Toronto, Catalyze, and Clean Tech North. The firm is recognized for excellence in supporting entrepreneurs and inventors with broad range of services, including provisional patent applications, business incorporations, agreements, and all forms of financing. Helen Jowett is CHRP and MBA. She's CEO of McDonald-Green. She's here to tell us about tricks and tools from trenches for building your dream team. She's qualified by Canadian Psychologist Press as Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Representative for Personality Profiles, Assessment, Interpretation, and Team Building. She's also certified practitioner for emotional inventory quotient and has vast experience with leadership practices inventory. She has over 17 years of experience in human resources and assists a number of companies with their HR and strategic requirements. Our firm provides a broad range of recruitment, assessment, training, career transitioning, and consulting services to employers. Please help me welcome Helen Jowett.
Good. Should I close those doors, do you think?
I think you're right.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really glad you're here to listen to what is my favorite topic, human resources. And I think that just gauging by some of the conversations I've had already this evening, quite a few of you are interested in what's happening with human resources. I do speaking with a group called MBET and CBET. They are University of Waterloo grads with engineering backgrounds who want to be entrepreneurs. So I think that that's kind of the similar presentation that I'll be providing for this group so that you can see what we talk about to those entrepreneurs specifically. So is everybody familiar with the CHRP? Is anybody?
No.
Okay, so I'll just tell you what that is. Several years ago, the Certified Human Resources Practitioner designation was given at college. You now have to have an undergrad before you can get it, but it was a set of courses that you took at college. And then, of course, the HRPAO, or the Human Resources Association of Ontario, would grant you candidacy to this particular accreditation. So we are governed by a specific body. So that means that I have to uphold to a certain set of standards and integrity. And every 5 years, I have to reapply for my certification, which means that I have to set aside so many points based on my job title and the functional responsibilities that I hold. Teaching, I just taught human resources at Conestoga College last semester because that gives me a lot of points. So regardless of my job and how high up I am required to do different things to make sure that I'm attaining a senior level of awareness and understanding on a continuum. So that's what CHIRP is, and I think you guys know what MBA is, right? They're the people that they always make jokes about and don't know how to work with UPS, if anyone's familiar with that joke. So I just wanted to touch on a few things. I think that this being casual would be much nicer. I know my MBET students and my CBET students, they stop and they ask questions right in the middle. Please feel free to do so. I'm not easily intimidated. And I'd really like it if you did ask the questions, because any question you have, probably other people have the same question. So I thought I would start off with indicators. So I've started a business, and I'm really excited about it. And when am I going to start looking at my business and suggesting that I need to hire more people? So some of the indicators might be, obviously, budgetary feasibility. It's not such a black and white answer, though, is it? The year I started my business, I did not pay myself for 2 years. But I paid my first employee because I knew I needed what we call feet and a heartbeat in the office while I was out drumming up business. So you have to kind of look at your budgetary feasibility, and again, it's not necessarily black and white. Any questions about budgetary? I think we all know we need some money in the bank before we get started hiring to some degree. And then gaps in your delivery to your customers or even suppliers. When you start to find, and this is kind of obvious, when you start to find that you're dropping the ball or you're letting people down, you may just need to look for either a specific skill set or someone who's got some similar skill set to yourself. And we'll deal with some of that as we go through the presentation. You're losing opportunities. You've seen specific opportunities. And let's face it, entrepreneurs, we don't just do business. We seize opportunity. We are shameless opportunists, right? And when I say that, I don't mean that in a negative way, but we tend to have a conversation with somebody and can immediately see there's a benefit coming to it. That's how entrepreneurs think, okay? So losing opportunities, diversification of offerings. So you're working along, you're growing your business, and all of a sudden a client says, you know what would be really handy? If you did this as well. And you started to recognize that this particular advantage could net you a pretty good result and could demonstrate some good synergy between things that you're currently offering and things that the customer is suggesting. Enhancing the value proposition. You know, when you start taking, there's many different things that can happen as you're growing your business, and branding might be one. So maybe it's time to start focusing on your branding. Maybe you need to go get venture capitalists, so you need to look at a specific skill set for that. You know, recognize what kind of value proposition you're presenting and how you can certainly enhance that. Specific skill necessity, right? This may come out of the fact that maybe there's a skill set that you don't have. Maybe there's a personality characteristic that isn't as easy for you to engage in as perhaps someone else that you could look at as a hire. And certainly, let's get ready for it, candidate supply. Now, we know demographics is telling us that within the next couple of years, what, 46% of the labor market's leaving? Now, there's a lot of suppositions we can make about that in the HR world. And one of them certainly is the next generation, employers are going to have to fight for. Right? So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a whole new world. There will not be enough people out there to do the jobs that will be available. So that's why the Canadian government has opened up the doors and started to recognize we need to be more immigration friendly. Questions around demographics at all? Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
With 46% of the market looking at least the estimates, what are the what's happening to the attitude to cut back on that? Keep people more engaged.
Well, what you will find is that the recession sort of happened at a time when a lot of the boomers were predicted to retire in 2010, and I'd say the average person lost between 30% or more on their investment portfolio, so they kind of had to stay in the workforce. So they're going to stay a little bit longer, but the average person who planned on retiring in 2010 is not going to wait till 2015. That's highly unlikely. They'll start their exit strategy now and we'll probably see some real signs of that. It just won't be as aggressively as it was going to be. Companies who are intelligent are starting to recognize the importance of succession planning. Right? They're actually starting to really charter. I'm vice chair of Conestoga College, and I'm working with our college president right now for his replacement in 3 years. So succession planning is of critical importance in organizations, and there's a lot of the boomers are still young and healthy enough because we're living longer that they want to stay and maybe work part-time or do some consulting. So employment's going to take on a whole new field depending on the knowledge that you bring to the table. Okay? All right. So who's your first hire? How do you make a decision as to who the first person you hire is going to be? Anybody got any ideas about what their first hire might look like? What might your first hire look like? Sometimes it's your bipolar opposite, if you can imagine. So you might have to do a bit of a needs analysis, take a look at your business plan, take a look at your mission statement, which you've created in that business plan, your vision statement, your strategic plan. In order for me to get from A to B, what kind of human resources strategy do I have to have? Right? So if you're producing something, you need to take a look at how many people you need to produce a certain quantity of things. If you are service-oriented, you need to recognize the kinds of service individuals that will help complement your vision or your dream. Market supply, we kind of touched on, because we don't manufacture people, do we? We can't manufacture what we're looking for. So we have to be aware in a startup company of where the resources, the valuable resources that we need are. So if we need grads with a specific skill set, where's the best place to get those grads?
Universities.
What's that?
Universities.
I can't hear you. Yes, universities, absolutely. If you're looking for a specific technical. But that doesn't mean we're going to hire people from universities necessarily. I tell you, RIM made that mistake. They only wanted to hire university grads, and they had continual turnover in one of their entry-level departments because they wanted to hire the best and the brightest. But you have to recognize that when you hire the best and the brightest and you cannot intellectually stimulate them, you will have turnover. Example, right? Okay, so market supply and can yes?
So what's your answer? Well, okay, universities are one of the places, but where do you get
Okay, good.
the right people? You start up a business, you have no one, and you prioritize basically, so you need office people and maybe sales people because you want to generate revenue. And probably grads usually don't have much sales experience, but
Right.
they are cheaper than
Yes.
experience. So where do you go to universities? Do you put ads on in the right departments, or what do you do?
Well, a couple of things. If you depending on the size of your organization, will sort of dictate just how much engagement you will have in looking for your candidate pool or even your new hires. But you may want to go to the college system for specific practical, vocational type learning. You may want to go to specific associations, engineering associations. For example, Human Resource Association, they post jobs for human resource people specifically.
This is within the university?
No, you may want to, it depends. Like, let's say you were going to hire, for example, you needed 20 electrical engineers. Well, you'd want to strike a good relationship with the university if you wanted them to be new grads. If you were looking for more mature workforce, you might want to strike a relationship with somebody in the alumni center, right? Who keeps in touch.
So how about poaching the competitors?
Well, we give that a nicer name, Naveed. We actually call that sourcing. But absolutely that happens. Many of what we're seeing now of associations of companies that do similar things speak to each other and actually they make arrangements with one another not to poach each other's employees. But in a very competitive environment, which you're about to approach in the next couple of years, I think sourcing is going to become something that a lot of companies who are wanting to grow and position themselves at the forefront are going to have to learn, right? Or have someone able to do. And I don't mean calling somebody up at work. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody who's like a relationship HR person who has a relationship with the universities and the college system and the alumni systems and the different labor suppliers, new Canadians coming into the country being certified, able to work with the Twitters and the mediums such as Facebook and LinkedIn and whatever else is new that's out there, to be able to cast the net wide, looking for those very special people that fit.
So one other question on the related note, do you have had any experience with the new immigrants who come in? So can they be a good resource for us to
Absolutely they can.
retain and train and retain?
Yes, absolutely they can. It's the system with which immigrants come into this country now is better now than it has ever been. They're getting better at finding the certification of somebody in one country, and you know, so you're not going to have everybody who's coming in with a doctorate driving a cab anymore. They're actually trying to find ways of certifying that person and bringing whatever difference in or gaps in the curriculum from the previous country to be able to fulfill
How
that.
do you go finding those people? How do you go find those people?
Well, we have many. I got to tell you, the government was proactive this time. They actually saw the boomer crunch coming, and Toronto, Waterloo, many of the aggressive regions in our country started to change the way with which they did immigration services. So they got rid of duplication of effort, and they started to become a little more strategic at changing some of the certifications for some things, and looking for ways to support new Canadians, looking for ways to help them with their English language skills. So there are centers. There's definitely one in Waterloo. There's definitely one here in Toronto, because Waterloo and Toronto worked well together to be able to put some of these together. So, you know, there's many different places to go and get employees. I like to say, you know, look everywhere, and then when you start to reach a certain amount of success because of your hiring, look at why there was success there. You know, was it the education? Was it the experience? Was it because they came from a specific company, because they did specific things that have a good match for your organization? Evaluate your ease of attraction and retention. You know, there are certain jobs that maybe you can attract people to. I mean, sometimes it's corporate culture that attracts employees, but sometimes it's actually a specific job that attracts employees. Sometimes it's actually a specific supervisor, because the next generation is all about lifelong learning. They want a boss who will invest in them emotionally, not just to be my supervisor, but to help me grow and learn. Okay?
How much? Sorry, go ahead.
So if you're a startup company, what are some of the things you can do to attract talent? Because you might be in a space, I mean, you are resource constrained. At the same time, you are competing with some of the more established players. So how do you differentiate yourself in such an environment? And how do you make yourself attractive to potential, to a potential or a prospective employee who might have options with some of the more established names?
Well, some people actually are very much attracted to new business startups, right? Some people love that thrill. And certainly the next demographic, they don't look for opportunity the same way the previous generation did. They look at each opportunity as am I learning, am I growing, am I being stimulated, am I contributing to what's happening here? So, previous generations would have been looking at startup and finding that to be high risk, but certainly the next generation's not so much. And how do you differentiate yourself? Well, look for what it is you're selling. Look for what it is you have to offer. And get that out in front. And certainly, through the universities, if that's the kind of caliber of search that you're looking for. So you're branding yourself. You're actually branding your organization from an HR perspective, especially, like I said, within the next couple of years when we find that it's very competitive to hire. Okay? And then, what kind of training or investment is required? And this is back to your question. Is this training leadership training, service training? Is it technical training? How do we get our employees at that maximum level of contribution? And that sort of helps to dictate where you might go and find those people.
Helen?
Yes?
So, in a direct approach, basically, to search for talents, there are the HR companies and the placement contractors, you might say. In many cases, you find them, it's more cost effective, basically, to use them. How much do you think it's more viable as a startup to use this approach as opposed to the direct approach to search for employees?
Good question. I like you to use them. But I'll suggest, you know, this is what you have to assess. Human resources, somebody with a chirp and a few years' experience is usually a salary of $70,000 to start. So you're probably not gonna have that in your company at start. So my suggestion is, you're right, it's a little more cost effective, especially if you can build a relationship with somebody, because if you have quantity hiring, they get to know your company very, very well and some of your challenges. They can do a much better job for you over the long haul, and they will value that relationship because it's easier to search for you. And they will give you, and should give you, a discount based on that. Right? Multiple hires means that they get better and better at hiring for you, and it gets easier and easier, so you should reap some rewards based on that as well. And then as your company grows, they usually say when you start hitting the 50 plus that you need some form of HR. And sometimes that starts off with just a payroll person and you grow them. I mean, we've seen many, many things. I mean, the old days, it was always the finance person that got the lucky job of HR and they hated it. You know, but usually at about 50, you should be looking at your own HR person. You don't always have to have a chirp. And a chirp means that they've been at the senior level, so they can strategically engage in things like attraction and retention strategies, and you know, they can deal with budgets and headcount, and certainly have the social intelligence to take care of uncomfortable terminations and things like that. But you don't necessarily need that at startup. Okay? And then another factor that I think is of critical importance at startup is don't just look at today's needs. If you can, broaden your mind and your scope and ask yourself, what am I going to need tomorrow? What am I going to need in 2 years? And what am I going to need in 5 years? Because when you keep your mind open like that, you don't just always hire because you need someone to do X and Y. You hire because, wow, down the road I'm going to be doing Z, Z, and this person just happens to have a fairly significant compensate fit here. Right? So try to think about it strategically. And certainly we talked a little bit about this vision and mission and values alignment. It's of critical importance for startup entrepreneurs to know this, because the next generation, that's exactly what they are looking for. This is what they want out of a company. They're not necessarily concerned about, you know, having a job that they'll be at for 15 years, but they are looking to make sure that there's some kind of value alignment for them. Okay, so we'll move on to this thought, and this is, you know, this is what I think is of critical importance when you're an entrepreneur, because you start to get a little bit of success, and then you start to believe your own rhetoric. Ooh, and that's kind of dangerous. That is kind of dangerous. So I suggest that the minute you start to need other employees, do some self-awareness. Do some digging. This is who I am, warts and all. I'm good at this. I'm okay at this. I'm not so good at that. If I'm going to continue to be successful, I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to stop doing this. And I'm going to keep doing this. Learn quickly where your strengths are, where your opportunities for development are. Learn where the threats of exposure are, because you're forgetting that you might just have to hire somebody who has something that you don't have, because your competition probably is, right? Okay, impact awareness. If you're going to start leading an organization and hiring other people, you darn well better start to recognize how you impact other people, because part of retention is being socially intelligent enough to lead others. And this means know how you make people feel, because you don't just hire a person to sit in a chair all day. You hire the person who has an annoying mother-in-law, a lousy teenager, a meddling sister-in-law. You hire the whole person, so you have to be socially intelligent enough to know how to manage and navigate around some of those interpersonal challenges. Leadership credibility. And again, leadership credibility comes more from being able to look inward than it does pointing fingers. So really get to know who you are. Social intelligence competencies. Those are the kinds of things I'm speaking of. Your ability to engage others and excite them in your dream, especially entrepreneurial startup. That's your selling ticket. That's what people get excited about. Know how to engage and sell, but you also have to know how to be firm and fair. You have to know how to grow an organization that has the structure and the policy and the process to engage others on that journey. Because once you get to a certain size, the family thing isn't working anymore, that we all know each other so intimately. And you have to change your approach. So you have to be really adaptable as you grow your business and employ more people. Values and beliefs, and again, remembering constantly as you hire, what do I need today and what do I need tomorrow? So you might need that bipolar, and bipolar I don't mean crazy. I mean somebody who's in complete opposition of you from a, say you have this, say you are this extroverted, big picture, strategic thinking person that loves to execute and get things closed. You may need somebody back there making sure your detail is good, or you're showing up at too many different places at the wrong time. You know, recognize who is your bipolar opposite, and is there some kind of benefit to you to be able to engage that. Devil's advocacy is another thing that I think is of critical importance as we grow a business. This is where you get to vet out what's working, what's not working, before the client gets to do it. Teaching your employees, and again, if you're hiring the next generation, they already think like this. They expect to be able to contribute from an argumentative standpoint. They're stimulated by it. So embrace it and use it to your benefit. You may want to hire creativity. Maybe you're the person that's invented the next great app. But you know that if you had more creativity, you could continue to invent the next great apps. Maybe yours is very specific to an interest that you have, but you've done pretty well with it. So you've got to start asking yourself, am I strong in creativity, or do I need some more creativity here to be able to capitalize and harness opportunity? And then there's the process, policy, and governance. And this is where it starts to get tricky, because when you have about a dozen employees, that's when it hits. And about a dozen, you say to yourself, hang on a minute. I have to do things differently now. I need to put some structure in place. And maybe you're not a structure thinking person. Maybe that's your hire. Maybe your operational leadership is the next hire for you. And that means somebody who can bring process, policy, governance. You can count on things being the same. That's what I'm doing right after startup. Because sometimes I'll go down and change things just for my own amusement. That's really hard to keep employees when you're changing things all the time. Know when you're impacting others adversely and bring in something to be able to mitigate it. And in my case, it was operational leadership who could bring policy, process, governance, so the other employees could tolerate the environment. Visionary leadership, so maybe you are effective at operational. Maybe you are a structure thinker who has brought in some form of entrepreneurial gadget that's very structure oriented. And maybe for you to get to the next level, you need somebody who brings vision. And you know, as entrepreneurs, again, believing our own rhetoric is very dangerous. We've got to navel gaze. We've got to take a look at ourselves and say, I'm going to be missing the boat here if I don't really look at myself from a critical perspective and see what else needs to be at the table. So I'm just going to do a quick little thing. Anybody here heard of a Myers-Briggs? Show of hands, everybody who knows their type. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about Myers-Briggs. That's one of the psychometric assessments that we use at McDonald-Green. We use it in many different forms. Nina's going to bring some legal information to you. What's of interest is assessment services does not have the governance it should have. You know, we've got lots of people certified in assessments and nobody really saying how it should be dealt with. So I brought my own values to the table when I got assessed 17 years ago. And I believe that anybody who's being tested should know what we're measuring, why we're measuring it, what we're going to do with the results, and give them the benefit of the information that can help them the most. So Myers-Briggs was started by Carl Jung, and he was kind of, due to his personality style, got tired of it, and he went on to the next thing. And a mother and daughter team of psychoanalysts took it over and said, wouldn't it be great if this was a non-clinical tool that just anybody could use and really take a long, hard look at themselves? So this is what I'm suggesting as an example of a tool that can help you objectively look within and say, here's my personality, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not so comfortable with. It's not an excuse not to grow, but it sure can help you understand why you do things the way you do them. And it's based on these 4 bipolar scales. I'll just quickly tell you. We've all heard extroversion, introversion, right? Where do you get your energy? Would you rather be around a lot of people doing things active? Or would you rather be in a quiet place internalizing thoughts? What's of importance to note is you can envision them on a continuum, and you can either be true to type extrovert, true to type introvert, or lay somewhere along there. Right? So is everybody familiar with that? And I'm kind of going through this particular thing fairly quickly. But you can see if you put an extroverted person in a lone doctor's office with no contact all day, they're probably not going to be very happy. Now, Myers-Briggs cautions us. They say, do not use this instrument for selecting employees. Well, I would go to court for it, but that being said, it's their tool, and so we don't use it for selection of employees. But what I encourage you to do is get to know a tool like this, because it is a way of bringing a far richer interview to the process. Just look at the questions that can come out of something like this. Sensory versus intuitive. 75% of the population is of sensory persuasion. 25% of the population is of the intuitive persuasion. Now, I must tell you, extroversion and introversion is kind of 50-50. There are demographic nuances, there are cultural nuances, there are different nuances, but I don't want to get into all that today. But 50-50 between the extroversion and introversion. But this 25% of the population is intuitive. Einstein was an INTP. So that is the creative troubleshooting, thinking up another new invention every other day. Einstein couldn't execute. Right? So we'll just kind of go through the other bipolar scales. Sensory is that detail orientation, here, now. What you see is what you get, your sensory capacities, whereas intuitive is that romantic big picture. Again, one is not better than the other. They're just different. Yes?
Could you explain why, what do you mean Einstein could not execute?
Okay, so when I get through these 4 bipolar scales, it will make a little bit more sense to you. Okay? So sensory is the here, now, what you see, what you feel, what you've tasted, what you've experienced is what you believe. Intuitive is why. Why is it like that? It's future focused. It's more connecting lots of dots on thinking. And then the next scale is thinking versus feeling. A little easier to say. Does your head rule your heart or your heart rule your head? And again, on any of these scales, you can be true to type one way or the other, or you can be somewhere along the continuum. And then judging and perceiving. These are clinical words. They're not meant to create any kind of thought or feeling, because these are the words that Carl Jung started with, I don't know, 75 years ago when he put this together. So judging is the need for closure, get it done, controlling resources. Perceiving is adaptability, problem solving, troubleshooting. For example, if somebody's a P, they are very good at customer service because they can relinquish control, which is exactly what an irate customer needs. So there are some nuances to profiling that help you understand what makes somebody successful at specific types of occupations. So Einstein was an I, let me see if I can get this, INTP. So he got his energy from thoughts and ideas in his head, right? He was big picture, constantly connecting dots. He was an objective thinker, and he was very adaptable. So he was continually looking at different inventions, but rarely could he do much with them. So here's a story that will help captivate what I'm trying to tell you. A gentleman called me in and said, I've got a problem, Helen. I've got these 7 millwrights out in the back, and I don't know what is taking so long, but we're upsetting our customers. These machines aren't going out. And he says, would you profile them? I said, you want me to convince a bunch of millwrights that we should do a personality test? I thought, okay. Well, we managed to convince them. We did the personality assessments. We found out that we had a myriad of different things in there, but there was no J, not a single need for closure. So what was happening was they were troubleshooting, and they were so detail-oriented, wanting it to be thorough and accurate and precise, way beyond the 100, 1,000 that the customer wanted, that the machines were not going out the door. The minute I put in a very strong J, the machines started going out the door. So what I'm trying to articulate here is that if you had 5 ESTJ profiles sitting around the table, they'll probably make a decision very quickly. If you have representation of more profiles, it will take you longer to reach decision, but your decision will be more holistic. So I suggest that psychometric testing might be a way of recognizing what your next need is. Any questions? Okay. And then social intelligence is, we've been certified in social intelligence for 15 years, and it's finally just taking heat. I was walking across the country for different firefighters at leadership conferences talking about the necessity for social intelligence. Does anybody know why we would need socially intelligent firefighters? I mean, it may seem kind of obvious sometimes, but anybody got any ideas? Why might we need socially intelligent firefighters?
It's great to hear teamwork.
Well, they're in that firehouse,
Yeah.
right? Day in, day out. They fight fires 3% of the time. And the rest of the time, they're griping about who's washing the cups. So that's one thing. The other thing is that fire prevention is becoming a greater activity in fire service. So they're actually going out to homes and teaching people how to install fire alarms and how to be strategic about getting out of the house and education. They're going into schools and talking to kids. So they're looking for a whole different firefighter than they'd ever looked for before. So they're using psychometric testing to ask richer questions, to be more holistic about who comes into the firehouse. Okay? We also made use of social intelligence as an assessment because what we were finding was we needed them to be more adaptable. Not only more adaptable, but we needed them to be able to manage their stress. So social intelligence assessments actually have quantifiers. So you write an assessment and you see a score of 120 as a social intelligence factor. And then there are some scales that, of course, interpersonal. Interpersonal is how you get along with other people. Intrapersonal. These scales cover how you see yourself. Self-confidence, ego, those kinds of things. And then, of course, stress management, which is a very big one for fire service. But it's also very indicative of who you're hiring. If somebody has very little stress management, what you may have is a loose cannon at work. So what I'm suggesting is you can't put somebody in a box. We're not there yet, but what you can do is ask questions. Can you tell me about a time where you felt very stressed out? How did you behave? How often does this happen? Then you can confirm or corroborate that by calling the reference and suggesting the same thing. How does this person deal with stress? How often did they tend to lose it? Okay? And then, of course, general mood. Happiness, optimism, those kind of things. Any questions about the social intelligence quotient inventory? Okay, so we did touch on this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate, these are the attraction and retention components. You got to build a good, solid corporate culture. Can anybody describe corporate culture? Anybody kind of describe it from any workplace?
How people interact with each other?
That is a part of it. It's a very difficult thing to describe. When it's good is one thing, but when it's bad, it's a lot easier to describe. It's much easier to describe a toxic corporate culture. Poor leadership, blaming. Yes, Nina?
Yes, if I were to say a culture, it's the unwritten assumptions by which people operate in the workplace.
That have
It's
become
like the
norms.
air. It's like the air, right? So if the air is, hot and smoky and toxic, you notice it. But if it's just good or clean, you just don't even notice that it works.
Yeah, and you can feel it right away. I think I've toured at least, 800 facilities in my 20 years of and I've got to be honest, it's something you feel as soon as you get into a company. You feel it. You may not be able to describe it, but you feel it. And when you work there and you know it's bad, then you can describe it quite easily.
I think if I can add, from my experience, corporate culture is, in my view, a set of values and beliefs that the corporation sets out for the employees so they can interiorize basically that over time and create a code of conduct basically to act upon.
Who sets the corporate culture? Anybody?
The visionary people, basically.
It's the values and beliefs as they exist.
Absolutely. So what you're both saying there is it starts with the CEO, and every person that joins and leaves your company, picture it as a puddle, puts their drop in it, and that corporate culture becomes like this knitted fabric thing, and then it's up to the CEO to maintain it appropriately so it doesn't become toxic. It takes 2 years, if you know what you're doing, to change a toxic corporate culture. It is a painful experience. Yes?
You know, it's like the framework defined by the CEO about the corporate culture. And I've seen out of experience, you know, in big companies that the CEO, you know, he tends to be a part of the corporate culture, but he focuses on his job role that the corporate culture, you know, scatters. So I believe one should have a team of diversified or like, you know, experienced people who can hold that corporate culture or at least maintain that dignity of having a corporate culture. It doesn't become toxic at the end of the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's easy. If you're in a leadership position, this is what I mean about social intelligence. If you are socially intelligent, you will manage things early before they become a big problem. Last week I had to go out to a church in Guam. I had a pastor who had inherited 2 employees that were squabbling and fighting constantly. I had to do an intervention. And that's because something was growing and growing, and this is what happens with a toxin. It grows and grows and becomes unbearable for everybody. 2 years ago, out to the Waterloo Regional Police, 4 dispatch officers stopped talking to each other. Nobody could remember why. You know? But it started to adversely affect the entire organization. It had to be stopped. It can become bigger than the people that are stuck in it, and they are so looking for a reason to have it stopped. Nobody wants to work in an adverse culture. Yes?
I'm just saying from my own experience too, sometimes a corporate culture can seem toxic to a certain kind of personality, whereas a different personality type would see it as toxic. For example, I used to work at a large Bay Street law firm out on like Gowlings, and I feel like a lot of the folks that I worked with were comfortable with the kind of culture that we experienced there, particularly as young lawyers.
Right.
But there are other folks that could come into that environment and find it very adverse. But you kind of have to want it and be comfortable in that space.
You're right.
To work
raise
there.
a great point, because that's what we're looking for. When we search for employees for companies, it's because we're looking for what they deem the fit. You probably heard that. And the fit is the way of describing, does this person have similar values and it's going to work for them? You know, for example, let's say you have a very autonomous environment and you hire somebody who needs lots of direction, you know, or vice versa. Yes?
Well, since I believe that most of us here, or at least entrepreneurs that are looking to grow their businesses, and we don't yet know our corporate culture, how it's going to be, how would you recommend to select the right candidates, basically, before we know what corporate culture we're going to have, let's say, in a couple of years?
Right. My suggestion is take a look at your population and be respectful of your population. Try to hire diverse people. There's so much richness in organizations who pay attention to that factor. Many companies I know who have been, you know, oh, I don't want any new Canadians, they can't speak enough English, and I try really hard to get them to get beyond it. You know, and it's their fear of health and safety issues. They've got some great concerns, but I try to get them to understand, but you're missing a richness. There's a richness when you have diverse peoples, and that is the way with which the boomers leaving is going to be resolved. A lot of new Canadians are going to be coming into we were dealing with the same thing just when females come into fire service, for heaven's sake. So here we are in this large candidate pool, which is going to be joining us, of new Canadians, A little more so, we feel those pains in Waterloo where we weren't as responsive and should have been. And I think companies are starting to realize they have to open up their minds. So you're looking to create a rich, diverse pool that represents your community. Okay, so can I start with the lady at the back? She's had her hand up for a bit.
Yes, well, just to add to the gentleman's question here, how do you know what your corporate culture is going to be? Isn't it going to start with your vision and your mission? Because you have an idea.
Your
of
vision
what
and your mission and your values are
are
the
going
initial
to trigger
formal
them.
definition that sort of create the waves with which other people, when they come into your corporate culture, start to put their stamp on it, right? So leadership really plays a significant role in maintaining that or destroying it. But they're not the only factor. Yes?
Two things. One, there are plenty of books on how to create corporate cultures. And there are also companies that you admire that have corporate cultures like what you have. If you study them, I mean, just take a look at the mission and the vision statements and background on their corporate, their CEOs and the VPs. But, so you learn from that, and maybe you can even use them as mentors. So it can be a win for you.
Yeah.
When you're starting that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ask yourself, am I going to the well too much? Are we becoming a company that is very narrowly focused? Or do I need to go to that well again because of a very specific skill or trait requirements? Okay? So I'll just take a couple more questions and then I guess it smells good, doesn't it? Hi.
Yeah, according to my observation, okay, like right now in lots of intellectual property-based company, okay, many of them, the guy who owns the intellectual property, like a patent, they don't know how to do the business, so they hire some people as a CEO, and they themselves took the place as a vice president of the VP.
Right.
Okay, so that means they will let the people who can do this, who can sell the invention, and then those people who can invent just create new pattern and create a new research result. And how, under these circumstances, how can we build up the so-called corporate culture?
So you're suggesting that
because the CEO was hired.
So the CEO was hired, who's
Yeah.
bipolar opposite of the inventor. So you're hiring someone a bit more ambassadorial, who's going to lead a group, who's going to execute sales and make things happen, right? A mover and a shaker. So you have these two personalities. Well, that is what's creating the corporate culture, isn't it? The diversity of those two individuals, if those are the first two employees, are creating what it's going to look like.
But I believe that there is a very good example of failure is the team that invented the PN junction,
I'm sorry?
the transistor.
Right, okay.
Okay, there are three people who invented the transistor, but that team eventually broke. Because the CEO guy too selfish, and he wants to take all the fruit as his own.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I think Nina is probably going to be all over that with vigor for sure, because that's why you need to, when you start to bring employees in with strength and leverage, you need to get your legal house in order for sure. Yes?
Talked about during the recruitment process, the sourcing, and in the event that you source an employee out of competition, and if this employee is signed a non-compete type of a agreement with his current
That
employer.
would be Nina as well.
Okay.
It's a great question, and you just wait, because she's one of the best. She's got great information for when you're chartering into legal territories. I will tell you this, never let a church tell you that they're a lawyer. You know, I tell everybody, I'll give you my spin on things, but you gotta see a lawyer when it comes to legalities. Definitely get yourself covered. Yes?
At what point of like your startup do you actually go out and hire HR personnel versus
Right.
yourself?
Well, you probably start with a payroll person once you could actually get an automatic payroll. Like, the world is changing so fast now, you can automatic payroll company take your payroll right up to as many people. But they usually say around 12 to 15, you start to need somebody with some HR competency. You may not need a $70,000 a year church, but you may need somebody, depending on whether you have, if you're producing something and there is a health and safety environment, or whether you need to invest in training or any of those kinds of things. And HR people tend to specialize like every other functional responsibility. You're specialized or else they're a generalist. And so, you know, it kind of depends on what it is you're doing and how you're doing it.
And there are excellent HR consulting firms so that you can hire people for half a day or 1 day a week to do the little things that you need. So I have a client, for example, that's quite sophisticated, that manufactures specialist parts for the aeronautics industry. They do not, even now, 25 years later, really need a senior HR person all the time, but they have one on retainer. And so they've got
That's
an
quite
HR
popular now.
generalist who kind of does the day-to-day stuff that needs to get done, you know, benefits, hiring, firing paperwork, but they have somebody on call. So the world has changed. It isn't, you don't necessarily need to hire somebody 100% at $70,000 a year.
No.
You can go to some very reputable HR consultants, and if you ever need one, let me know.
I'm right here, I actually do those things.
Yeah.
But honestly, you know, she's right, a lot more outsourcing is happening nowadays. But I ask you to consider it if you get to be too big and you need somebody that has, you know, there are times when it is needs in-house and times when it's not.
So I just had another question too. It's just in terms of like, is there a report or something in terms of finding out going rates for a certain kind
Yes.
of jobs? Like,
Salary surveys are run annually by many different organizations. And you can call an HR consulting firm and they can tell you what's competitive, what's within the 25th percentile, what's within the 75th percentile, by number of employees, by region, by manufacturing versus distribution versus health versus just
Legal.
about everything. Yeah. So salary surveys are out there to help you and they are your friend. It's a really good thing to know about. Okay.
Is there any Ontario labor law or WSIB regulation that you had to have a HR person for certain employees?
No, no, there is not. No. If you have infractions, it's by complaint basis, and so you might need to put some energy and attention somewhere. But like Nina said, a lot of it can be done as needed. You don't always have to have someone in-house. Yes?
So can you figure out the personality of a person with 1 or 2 interviews? Because I think it is very hard to find the right fit with just 1 or 2 meetings.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And what they say in psychometric testing is, if I spent 6 months with you, Naveed, I'd be able to maybe do that. If I interviewed you and asked the right questions as a practitioner, yeah, I could probably do that. But you know yourself, so good interviewers can ask good questions. But if you're not in HR and you want to know, this is a way of delivering you proactively some good information, ask richer questions, for example, and it's a great development tool. So if you brought somebody on and you had their personality profile information, you would know, oh, this person's going to do really well in this area if I invest in them or I train them or they'd be encouraged, they'd enjoy it, that kind of
So for my first hire, should I take your help and have him screened out before I can go and interview him?
You could, like I said, you got to look at your strengths. What am I good at? What do I need help with? Because maybe this is something you're good at. Maybe, you know, we have plenty of clients who this is where they struggle. They don't do a good job. They find themselves in the court system because they don't hire the right people and they don't invest in the people properly to give them, you know, and Nina's going to talk about all the legal stuff. So if you're not strong in interviewing and finding good candidates, then maybe you look for some help. Okay? All right, great questions, everybody. Thank you very much.